I believe the most important number to watch in your business is your per man hour rate. You might have been thinking I was going to say COGS, and I do think COGS is right up there, but I think it's your per man hour rate. And let me explain. So if you don't know what per man hour is, it's this simple. If you bill $100 an hour, and let's just imagine labor, forget the material cost. So if you're installing something like an HVAC unit, or you have parts for your plumbing or irrigation business, forget that for the moment. I just want to talk in pure labor. So you're billing $100 for the labor. If you have 2 men on the job, meaning the job was $100. You billed the client $100. If 2 men were doing the job for 1 hour, you divide 100 by 2, you are billing out $50 a man hour. Just using that as an example. That's your per man hour rate. And the way I think about per man hour is from ignition to ignition. You pull up the truck, pull up in front of the client's home, you turn off the ignition. From that moment until the moment they get back in the truck, finish their paperwork, turn back on the ignition, that's the amount of time it costs to produce the work. And as a result, you take that time divided by how much you billed the client to do the work and the number of individuals on the job, and you get a per man hour rate. So your experience might say, COGS, cost of goods sold, the cost to produce the work, labor plus materials. That's like the most important number. And I think it is one of the absolute most important numbers in the business. I don't think you're incorrect. But for most people, they don't calculate their COGS frequently, and they don't have an easy way to do it. And so for most people, the number that you can watch all the time is your per man hour rate. And your per man hour rate, frankly, drives COGS. And in most businesses, I do believe COGS is the problem. A lot of the businesses I've looked at over the years, and I've looked at their P&L, and they're trying to figure out what's wrong with their business, and they think they're spending too much money. They need to cut their fuel expense. They need to cut their supplies expense. They need to cut some expenses, but they don't know exactly what they are. I look at it, it's like, no, this is an expense problem. You're not overspending. Sure, you can save a few bucks here or there, but it's going to make no real difference on the business. You have to drive down COGS. You have to get more efficient with materials, or you need to mark up your materials, and you need to raise your prices, or you need to pay less to employees. And you generally can't pay less to employees. You probably actually need to pay more to your employees to attract more of them and retain them for longer. You got to probably raise your prices. Now, COGS could also be impacted by inefficiencies on the job, producing the work. COGS tend to be the problem. So as an example of COGS, cost of goods sold, cost to produce the work, if you charge $30 and your COGS are 50%, meaning your labor or your labor plus materials equates to 50% of whatever you bill, then that, in my example, if you charge $30, that leaves you with $15 because your COGS are 50%, which, by the way, 50% is a bad number. You don't want 50% COGS in your business. If your COGS are 50%, then you build 30, that means you have $15 left to run the business with, to pay for all the expenses, pay for your overhead, make a profit. If you charge $2,000 to do a job and your COGS are 50%, same thing. You got $1,000 left over to make profit and cover all the expenses of the business. And as I said, in my example, 50% is bad, but it's easy math that I can do in my head as I'm talking to you. So you absolutely need to know your COGS, and you need to review them as often as possible. But what I encourage you to do is watch your per man hour rate and watch it all the time. I would argue you should watch it daily. And if you're using a software system that can call out to you variance in your man hour rate, so as an example, if you have, and I have nothing to sell you around this, I have no software, but I used to own a software company. And in that software company, you could set a target man hour rate by service. And so we could show you on a report if you were over or under your target man hour rate by day, by job performed. And so if your target man hour rate was $75 or $125, let's just do the $100 an hour. If your target was $100 per man hour, and for that particular job, it came in at $85 a man hour, it would call it out so that you could figure out why. You could do we have a pricing problem at this job? Was it just that something happened today that was an anomaly at this job? But you need to know about it so you can correct it. Whether it be you do something to correct it with the team and the way they're producing the work, or be it you correct it via pricing, or you correct it by going back to the client. A very elementary example that comes to mind for me, and it's a good example for many because we own homes. If you have a lawn company mowing your lawn, and they normally show up, mow the lawn, they hit their per man hour rate, and then one week that's off, and I dig into it, I might find that the homeowner or you or me, we put a trampoline in the backyard, and we put some big, like a big playhouse in the backyard that the crew's now got to move the trampoline, they got to move the playhouse, they got to move this stuff to produce the work. It added 7 minutes to the job, and suddenly we weren't hitting our numbers. Watching man-hour rate daily tells me if there's a problem, and I can fix it like that so my COGS aren't impacted, so my profit at the end of the year is not impacted. I can use per man-hour rate to see how one crew performs against another, how one job performs against another, how one type of client or one type of property performs against another. And that is the fastest number I can watch on a daily basis to know, am I in line? Am I hitting my numbers? Am I going to hit my targets? I love COGS. I would tell everybody to live on COGS. The reality is most don't even pay attention to that number, much less know how to explain it. They don't know how to get the data to do it. They don't know how to, because they don't know how to get all their employee costs and tie it back to a job or tie it back to a division. But what almost everybody can do is they can pay attention to per man-hour rate. There's a little additional work that needs to be done so you can figure out how man-hour rate and COGS relate. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but if you know your man-hour rate, you can make improvement. So as an example, let's again, for just pure simplicity, I know a lot of people watching are not pure labor businesses, but it's the easiest way to explain this. If you're a labor-only business and you make $50 a man-hour, and you know that your COGS are 50%, that means $25 of your 50, well, that's not 25, but $25 of your 50 goes to producing the work. It goes to labor in my example because we're using labor-only example here. So it costs $25 in labor to produce $50 an hour. If you take your man-hour rate to simply $60 an hour, and simply, like, that's a pretty big jump, but now you make $60 an hour, but it still costs you $25 an hour to produce the work, you've just made 15% more profit in your business. If you're $1 million business, you just made an extra $150,000 a year. If you do that all throughout your business, take home pay or money to invest in your business. I think the math is something like that. Now, how do you get to $60 an hour when you're doing 50? Well, you've got to be watching the numbers all the time. You've got to be raising prices. You've got to be selling work at the right price. You've got to be coaching your team. You've got to be working with the crews that are underperforming to the target man-hour rate. But unless there's a number you're looking at, you can't do any of those things I just described. And that's why I love per man hour. And fortunately, a lot of software systems and home services calculate the per man hour rate. And again, I understand in your business, you probably have a materials component, such as you're installing equipment. Or if you're in irrigation, you're installing, valves, and you've got pipe and you've got wire. If you're in HVAC, you've got the units and the equipment. If you're in plumbing, you've got parts. I get that, but I've made this very simple as an explanation because we're not using a spreadsheet and I'm not showing it to you. We're just talking in labor, and in real COGS, materials and labor are both in COGS. But a lot of times, even in a materials business, labor is still the biggest item on your P&L. And so it's critical that you control labor, that you watch labor, that you think about labor, and per man hour rate is exactly that number that will show you how you're doing on labor. And as I said, fortunately, a lot of software companies will track it. And so I'd encourage you to benchmark job to job, client to client, employee to employee, week to week. How are you doing for per man hour rate? Consistently up those targets and try to get a better and better rate through raising prices, through better productivity, through training the team. Lots of ways you can do it. That's the number to watch, in my opinion.